It had been drizzling on and off in Dunsleigh for several days. The street sparkled with puddles, and the old stone drains along Fernmere Lane made soft gurgling sounds as they managed rainwater. One morning, something unusual happened. Fern, a shy tabby known for keeping her distance from people, was sitting stiffly by one of the storm drains. She didn't budge. Hours went by, and neighbors started to gather. It was clear that something was not right. When someone finally pried open the heavy lid, 5 tiny kittens were found inside, alive, wet, and desperately seeking warmth. As I knelt beside the drain, I felt a tightness in my chest. At that moment, I realized Fern wasn't just showing us where her kittens were. She was signaling that she needed our help in a way I had never witnessed before. Looking down into that storm drain, everything else faded away. The noise, the rain, even the voices of those around me. All I could see were those small bodies huddled together like petals on a wilting flower. Their eyes were barely open, and their fur was damp and matted from the cold. My instinct was simply to get them out, but the drain was too deep for me to reach. Behind me, Fern was pacing, giving short, anxious meows. She wasn't scratching or running away this time. It was as if she sensed our understanding. I called Jasper, knowing he would be quicker and more agile. He arrived within minutes, soaked but determined. He lay down carefully, extending his arm into the drain. One by one, we pulled the kittens out. Pip, the tiniest, hardly moving, Tansy, who hissed even in her vulnerable state, and Moss, Clove, and Bramble, all shivering but alive. We wrapped them in Jasper's hoodie, and I remember how his hands trembled as he held them close. Moira soon joined us with towels and a thermos of warm water. Initially, she didn't say much. She just knelt by Fern and gazed into her eyes. "You clever girl," she softly acknowledged. That night, I took the kittens home. I prepared a cozy spot in a laundry basket with blankets, turned on a space heater, and sat quietly beside them for hours. Honestly, I didn't know what I was doing. Before this experience, I wasn't even a cat person. But there was something about the way Fern was looking at us, how long she had waited. I felt I couldn't just walk away. I didn't want to abandon them. The next few days turned into a whirlwind of activity. It was chaotic, but also oddly rewarding. Pip refused to eat, and I found myself using a syringe to feed him kitten formula every few hours. Tansy constantly tried to sneak under furniture to hide. Bramble and Moss clung to each other like siblings, while Clove, the most adventurous, attempted to escape the basket by day 2. As for Fern, she sat by the kitchen window most days, watching everything unfold. I had set out food and created a cozy spot for her in the shed, yet she wouldn't come near the kittens. It seemed her mission was to seek help, not to stay. Every afternoon after school, Jasper would stop by. He'd sit quietly on the floor, allowing the kittens to explore his lap. He didn't say much, but his calm presence seemed to provide a sense of comfort for them. It was clear that this connection was beneficial for both Jasper and the kittens. On a different note, Moira began to voice some concerns. "What's the plan?" she asked one evening. "Are you keeping all 5? Her tone was practical, not judgmental. "They won't stay kittens forever." I hadn't really considered the future yet. My mind was still preoccupied with getting up at 2 a.m. to check if Pip was okay. Then, a difficult thought emerged. Someone suggested reaching out to a shelter. They had more expertise and better resources, they claimed. However, the idea of letting them go felt unsettling. It seemed too soon and too detached, almost as if it would diminish Fern's efforts to help them. That's when it dawned on me. This wasn't just a rescue operation. It was the start of something much more complicated. By the 5th night, the rain returned, tapping sharply against the windows as if it wished to enter. I was dozing on the couch when a strange, rhythmic sound from the laundry room jolted me awake. It wasn't loud, but it felt off. I hurried into the laundry room, my heart racing, and saw Tansy convulsing, her little body shaking and a bit of foam at her mouth. Panic set in. I quickly wrapped her in a towel and called Moira. She answered on the 2nd ring, her voice steady. "She needs a vet, now." The clinic was a 20-minute drive, and I rushed through red lights. They took her in quickly, but when the vet returned, his expression told me this was serious, more than just a cold or dehydration. "Are the others showing any signs?" he asked. "Like lethargy, twitching, or loss of appetite?" I explained that Pip was still weak and that Bramble and Moss had napped for most of the day. Just then, it felt like the ground fell away beneath me. The diagnosis was toxoplasmosis, likely contracted from untreated exposure. In the wild, it's often fatal without intervention, and even worse, it might be spreading to the others. I drove home with Tansy still at the clinic, the other 4 kittens bundled in a blanket beside me, silent and fragile, unaware of the looming danger. When I reached home, I noticed Fern was gone, just missing. There was no food disturbed and no paw prints in the mud. It was as if she had disappeared into the night. Suddenly, I found myself questioning if she had always known this outcome was inevitable. I barely managed to sleep that night. The rain outside had shifted from a gentle patter to a relentless drumming that felt like it was pounding on the roof. Inside, the stillness was even more unsettling. Each breath the kittens took felt delicate, as if I needed to keep an eye on them. Pip let out a soft whimper in his sleep, curled up under my old wool scarf. Meanwhile, Clove kept nudging his face into my arm, searching for something that wasn't there. Nestled on the floor with my back against the wall, I listened for any sound from outside, a rustle, a paw step, that might mean Fern had come back. But all I could see through the window was darkness and cold. When morning arrived, I called Jasper. He appeared silently, soaked to the skin, with the hood of his jacket weighed down by the rain. He didn't ask about Fern and wouldn't meet my gaze at first. Instead, he knelt next to the basket, reaching out a shaky hand for Bramble, who crawled into his lap. It was the first time I noticed Jasper crying, not with loud sobs, but quietly, with tears sliding down onto the kitten's back. I didn't interrupt. We both understood this situation had grown beyond just saving them. It had become something deeper, a responsibility neither of us anticipated but couldn't ignore. Moira joined us later, moving at a slower pace than usual, holding a small plastic bag with medicine the vet had provided for emergencies. She paused before speaking, taking in the damp towels, the makeshift heat lamps, and the scattered bowls and bottles. Finally, she said softly, almost with a sense of reverence, "You both need to think about how much you're willing to take on, because this doesn't end with 5 kittens." By the end of the week, the kittens had become the calm heart of my life. Everything in the house began to revolve around their care: scheduled feedings, warm compresses, late-night checks on their breathing. But the changes weren't confined to these walls. Word of the rescue traveled quickly through Dunsleigh. One morning, I found a folded note wedged between the latch and the doorframe. It read, "You're not trained, you're not equipped. These animals need proper care, not sympathy." It was unsigned, but the message lingered in my mind, cold and hard to shake off. Later that day, I spotted 2 council workers near the drain where Fern had lingered. They were discussing plans to seal it off permanently, citing safety concerns and sanitation rules. One of the kids looked up and casually asked if I had gotten rid of the kittens yet. His tone wasn't mean, just indifferent. That kind of indifference felt sharper than anger because it showed how little he cared. Meanwhile, Moira shared that she had received a call from a larger shelter in Inverness. They offered space, medical support, and even a foster network. On the surface, it seemed like the perfect solution. It was safer, smarter, and cleaner. Yet the idea of handing the kittens over to strangers felt unsettling. It wasn't about distrust. It was that I didn't think the kittens were ready to be just another case. We had been through too much together, and yet, Fern still hadn't returned. I stood at the doorway of the spare room, observing the 5 tiny bodies snuggled together, soft fur rising and falling in unison. The heater hummed gently, providing warmth, but it did nothing to calm the turmoil within me. Each day brought new uncertainties. I couldn't ignore the reality anymore. The kittens were growing stronger, but I felt myself wearing thin. The nights dragged on, mornings came too quickly, and I started avoiding mirrors because I didn't want to face the toll this quiet dedication was taking. It wasn't just fatigue, it was fear. Fear of making mistakes, fear of knowing when it was time to let go. Jasper had begun asking questions that lingered long after he left. What if they never get adopted? What if one of them dies? He never directly asked if I planned to keep them, but I could feel that question hanging in the air between us. Could I let them go? Could I trust someone else to care for them as we did? Moira had said something recently that stuck with me. You have to love them enough to let them go. or love them enough to stay. I didn't know which option I was capable of yet. It was just past midnight when I heard it. A sound, barely noticeable against the wind, but enough to pull me off the couch. As I opened the back door, the cold air rushed in, feeling like a warning. I stepped outside with a flashlight, my boots sinking into the damp ground. The rain had stopped, but the night felt heavy, as if something was watching. That's when I spotted them, small, muddy paw prints leading along the back path. They weren't fresh, but not old either, and they were too tiny to belong to Fern. They didn't lead toward the house, but away from it, heading for the edge of the woods behind the property. The next morning, Pip was gone. I searched everywhere in the house. I opened every drawer, checked every cupboard, and explored every little space under the furniture. We had kitten-proofed everything. The windows were locked, and there were no gaps or holes in the screens. It just didn't make sense. There were no signs of forced entry, only an open vent cover I hadn't noticed before, with rusted screws scattered on the floor, barely disturbed. As I knelt beside it, my heart raced, and I called his name softly, like a prayer. Jasper arrived right after I called. I could see his face fall as he grasped what had happened. We checked the storm drain, scanned the street, and wandered through the woods with flashlights, calling for Pip among the thick brambles. But Pip was still missing. In his absence, a heavy silence settled in the house, one that none of us dared to acknowledge. In the days that followed, the house felt off balance, as if the usual rhythm had broken and everything was out of sync. The remaining kittens seemed restless, especially Clove, who paced around the laundry basket with tiny claws clicking against the plastic, as if searching for an escape. Bramble clung to moss, remaining still, while Tansy, finally starting to recover from her illness, meowed constantly, a painful sound that seemed to call for someone who wasn't coming back. I knew she was looking for Pip, and with each echo of her voice through the hall, a part of me felt emptier. Jasper began visiting more often. He brought sketchbooks filled with drawings of the kittens, Pip curled up like a comma, Clove poised mid-pounce, Tansy with her ears perked up as she stretched. He didn't mention the missing vent cover much, but he began checking every window and screen when he arrived. There was a protective edge to him now, sharper than before, as if losing Pip had uncovered something deep within him, a grief he hadn't yet learned to name, despite only being 16. Moira had also grown quieter and more attentive. One afternoon, she lingered long after feeding time, sitting with me at the kitchen table, tracing the rim of her mug as she watched the kittens out the window. "You know they imprint on moments, not just people," she said. "That's why they remember storms, smells, voices, loss." Her voice was steady, but I could sense the heaviness of her own memories woven into her words. That night, as I watched Clove finally drift off to sleep with one paw reaching for the empty corner of the basket, it hit me. We were doing more than just caring for them. We were sharing in their sadness. An uncertainty loomed over us like a cloud we couldn't escape. By the end of the second week, a palpable tension settled into our routines, something unspoken but impossible to ignore. Jasper had started to ask questions, not out of anger, but with a quiet understanding that a decision was approaching, whether we were prepared or not. "So, are they staying?" he asked one evening. His gaze focused on the kittens as they clumsily tumbled over one another on the folded blankets. "Or are we giving them up?" I paused, momentarily lost in thought, watching Tansy full of energy as she playfully wrestled Bramble while Moss observed from the warmth of the heater. They had grown stronger and healthier, but they were also more attached to us. They followed me around the house, often jumping into my lap as if that was their rightful place. And I realized that, in a way, I had started to feel I belonged to them too. Moira's words echoed in my mind, "Love them enough to stay, or enough to let them go." It had sounded beautiful then, but now felt sharper, almost painful. The call from the Inverness shelter came again, this time with an offer to pick the kittens up that very weekend. They mentioned having potential fosters lined up, safe, waiting homes. It should have been relief, but instead, I felt an emptiness settle in my chest. That evening, I found myself sitting outside by the old storm drain. The lid was still marked with Fern's paw prints, now faded and hard. The stillness around it felt heavy with memories. I whispered her name, half hoping to hear a response. But I started to wonder if my difficulty in deciding was about what was best for the kittens or what I was afraid to lose by letting them go. The moment of truth didn't arrive with thunderous emotions. It came quietly during a golden afternoon, light streaming through the windows as the kittens curled up in a purring pile. Jasper stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, holding his well-worn sketchbook, its edges curled and smudged with graphite. "You're not going to call them, are you?" he asked, his voice steady. There was no accusation, just a calm certainty that he already knew the answer, but needed me to confirm it. I wanted to tell him I didn't know. I was still considering my options, thinking about what would be best for the kittens. However, we both knew too much about our situation. The truth was harder to ignore. "No," I said, "I don't think I can." At first, he didn't respond. He simply nodded and took out a folded flyer from his coat pocket. It was from a local community board about a vet clinic that was starting a low-cost adoption program. He placed it on the table like a truce gesture. "Then we do it here, on our terms." Later that evening, Moira stopped by. She was quiet at first, sipping her tea. Eventually, she spoke in her calm way. "You're making a choice that will stay with you. Not because it's easier, but because you've seen something in them, and in yourself, that makes it hard to walk away." I glanced over at the kittens. Clove was awake, sitting by the door, his gaze fixed outside as if waiting for something or someone. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about rescuing them anymore. It was about building something none of us had expected. A home. Sometimes a home is simply where you find it hard to leave. The house felt quieter than usual. Not empty, but full of anticipation. The kittens had become more agile. Bramble had learned to climb the couch. Clove was dragging socks down the hallway like prizes, and even Tansy had shed her shyness, playfully nipping at anyone who passed by. Yet beneath the playful sounds and the gentle warmth of the heater, there was an unspoken understanding that something was about to change. Then on Saturday, the shelter van arrived unexpectedly. I hadn't called them, but there they were, just in case. A kind-eyed woman stepped out, holding a clipboard in one hand and a small carrier in the other. She walked toward the porch slowly, glancing around as if unsure whether she was welcomed. I went outside before she could knock. Inside, I could hear Jasper softly reading to the kittens, the pages of his sketchbook gently rustling. "I didn't confirm," I said, surprised at how quiet my voice sounded. "I know," she replied with gentle understanding. "We just hoped." She extended the carrier toward me, but I didn't take it. Inside, Clove suddenly let out a sharp, clear meow, almost defiantly. I turned back to the window and saw him perched confidently on the couch, his ears perked and eyes bright, watching me intently. The woman nodded once, understanding more than I had the words to express. "Sometimes," she whispered, "they pick you." Standing there, I felt a mix of heaviness and resolve. The decision wasn't looming ahead. It had already unfolded in the shared moments, in nights spent watching over them, and in a bond that no paperwork could ever define. We had all been chosen, slowly and fiercely, as if it was meant to be. I closed the door before she had a chance to say goodbye. It wasn't to be rude, it was simply necessary. My voice felt unsteady, and my hands were trembling. I watched the shelter van pull away, its tires crunching on the wet gravel as it made its way down the hill. For a moment, I stood there with my forehead against the glass, listening. What I thought was silence was actually filled with breathing, purring, and tiny paws shifting against the floorboards, life quietly unfolding in the corners of a home I hadn't realized I was building. When I turned around, all of them were watching me. Clove was the first to come forward. He bounded off the couch and curled his tail around my ankle. Bramble followed, almost stumbling over a stray slipper, and soon Tansy and Moss padded in, their heads cocked to the side, waiting for what would happen next. I dropped to my knees, and they pressed against me, just like on that first night when everything had felt overwhelming, and I was unsure of what to do. Then I heard a sound outside. Soft, gentle. I opened the back door just enough to see her. Fern, at the edge of the yard. She was thin and weathered, yet undeniably herself. She didn't come closer, she simply sat there, eyes locked on mine. In that instant, it felt like time had folded in on itself. The storm drain, the meows, the uncertainty, all of it suspended in the air between us. I didn't call out, I just knelt in the doorway and waited. When she finally stepped forward, one cautious paw at a time, I understood what was happening. This wasn't the end of a rescue. It was the start of a family that no one expected, especially not me. Fern's return wasn't dramatic or filled with grand gestures like you see in movies. It was quiet and understated, as if she had patiently waited for me to realize that some things cannot be rushed or controlled. She slowly entered the yard, keeping her distance, but her eyes conveyed more than just the caution of a wild animal. They expressed something softer, a bond built over time, not simply dictated by circumstances. When she approached me, resting her paw on the step, it felt as if she was returning to reclaim a part of our shared journey. It wasn't something she needed to do, but rather a reflection of the connection we had built together. The kittens, on their part, had begun to settle into their own unique rhythms. Each one displayed distinct personalities, little quirks and habits that made them each special. They created their own gentle world within our home, filled with soft purring, the warmth of their bodies cuddling next to me, and the occasional scurry as one dashed across the room. Fern, too, had her own way of being present. She would appear at the yard during unexpected moments, maintaining a connection that felt strong yet fleeting. She never lingered too long, but her visits were enough to remind me of her existence. In the weeks that followed, I found myself grappling with uncertainty. The bond I felt with both the kittens and Fern surprised me. I often caught myself gazing out of the kitchen window, observing them play and reflecting on what the future might hold. Was I truly ready to keep them? Would I be able to provide what they needed? Or would I eventually find myself standing at the door again, trying to navigate the next chapter that seemed to unfold quietly around me? But for the moment, there was no urgency, no pressing questions to answer, just the reality of their little lives and the comfort that came from realizing our rescue effort had transformed into something much deeper. It was a journey we had embarked on together, a family shaped in unexpected ways, with a bond that spoke louder than any words could. Fern's return was unceremonious. There were no dramatic gestures or grand reunions like you might find in a movie. Instead, it was a subtle moment, as if she had been waiting for me to grasp that this connection couldn't be rushed or controlled. She entered the yard slowly, keeping some distance, yet the look in her eyes wasn't just the caution of a wild creature. It held something softer, a testament to a bond built over time, free from expectations. When she came to me once more, her paw touching the step, it felt like a gentle affirmation. We had woven this story together, and it was just as important to her as it was to me. As for the kittens, they continued to thrive, each one embracing their individual quirks within our shared home. Together, we formed a small universe filled with quiet joys, a tapestry of purrs, warmth, and the soft flurries of their movement connecting us all. Fern wandered in and out of the yard at unexpected times. She was there just enough to keep our bond alive, but never stayed long. As the weeks passed, I realized my decision didn't feel completely final. I hadn't anticipated the deep affection that came from Fern and the kittens. I often found myself by the kitchen window, observing them, lost in thought about what the future might bring. Could I really give them a permanent home? Would it be enough? Or would I eventually be left standing at the door again, trying to understand what came next, something that was already unfolding without my awareness? For now, though, there was no rush. I didn't need to search for answers. I simply felt the significance of their little lives and the reassurance that rescuing them wasn't just my journey, it was ours. We had become a family in ways I never anticipated, forming a connection that needed no words. If you felt the emotions in this story, consider liking, commenting, or subscribing to join us for more heartfelt journeys. Don't forget to click the bell icon for updates on new content and share this story with someone who might appreciate a spark of hope today. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Would you have made the same choices? What does the concept of home mean to you? Thank you for being part of this journey with us.